Hello everyone, Mark Heck coming to you from Vancouver Island. When Alberta separates, the looming big question, of course, is whether or not it would join America. And it probably will, but it really shouldn't. Now, before I get into that, I want to give a big shout out to someone in the comment section who directed me to Martin Armstrong. I'd actually never heard of the guy before, but apparently he and I and many of you and others are seeing a very similar future ahead that ties into this whole question about Alberta and America and some other stuff. Now, that future, unfortunately, is the collapse of Western civilization. How we deal with it is really the big question. Do we deal with it badly, or do we deal with it well? So people like Martin Armstrong or the billionaire hedge fund manager Ray Dalio have been looking at this situation from an economics perspective. And Armstrong uses what he calls his economic confidence model. And Dalio uses a form of historic economic cycles theory. Armstrong predicts that Alberta will separate and then Canada will break apart. Not long after that, America will break apart as well. And others are coming to a similar conclusion, but from different perspectives. Now, one of the most insightful came from Professor Joseph Tainter at Utah State University back in 1988, who developed a unifying theory to explain all civilizational collapses. And it came down to understanding energy use and organizational complexity. Then there's the multifactored approach that came from Jared Diamond in his book, Collapse: Why Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. Others have been looking at not why civilizations collapse, but instead noticing how civilizations, they often show similar signs and symptoms right before they collapse. One that's gaining some traction lately is summarized very simply as men start civilizations and women finish them. It has to do with feminism. Feminism is actually, it's quite universal, and it tends to appear right at the end of many civilizations, just before they collapse. And the problem seems to be that women get into and dominate professions that they probably shouldn't. And this happens late in the civilizational cycle. So professions like law and justice, military, anything to do with innovation, and any profession that challenges ideas. These are all at the greatest risk. So, for example, when a legal system is increasingly dominated by women, you begin to see these absolutely insane rulings, like the one here in BC that just came out, where the BC Human Rights Tribunal, made up almost all of women, fined a man $750,000 for saying that men are men and women are women. Now, will women voluntarily step aside from these professions and admit they don't have perhaps the software for logical thinking? Of course not. It'll only get crazier. So the judicial system is bad, and then there's academia, the place where ideas are supposed to be brought forth and challenged in open debate. When universities are dominated by women, however, universities stop being places of open inquiry and debate. And it's not hard to see. I mean, if you were a professor at any university today, and you said what I'm saying, that women are destroying higher education, well, instead of debating the idea with the usual logical scientific methods, including, a null hypothesis, gathering the evidence, and making attempts through open debate and inquiry to then reject the null hypothesis, you would instead lose your job, which of course only reinforces the very point that higher education is no longer functioning as it should. So now, if higher education was irrelevant, then it wouldn't matter that women were destroying it, as I propose. But the problem is that they're in the early stage of civilization, government, military, business, and education, they all work together collaboratively. Research and innovation often begins in the universities, it gets taken up by the military and business, and then directed and managed by government. Now, when all four are working together, civilizations thrive. But when one or more of these branches breaks down, the whole thing collapses. Now, are the women the cause of collapse, or just a correlation? That would be something to examine academically. But of course, that avenue is closed. So another way of looking at our impediment is through the origin story. The story is the creation myth that a group of people tells themselves about themselves, which holds them together as a cohesive group. And really good origin stories stand the test of time. They hold a society together pretty much indefinitely. Bad origin stories don't. So if you were to ask, well, how do we get a good origin story? We'd start with a hypothetical empty island. And this island would have a bunch of people who all came to it at the same time, but from different parts of the world. And they would all have the challenge of communicating. So the first thing they would have to do is create their own language. And then let's assume this is an island. It's a difficult place to live if everyone doesn't work together. So everyone has to work together in order to survive, and they do. They work together, they have their own language, and over time they have children and grandchildren together, and they build a really nice place. And the people see themselves as one people. A place where everyone trusts one another, crime is virtually non-existent, life is pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And they tell themselves about how they persevered and came together as a single people. So that's the beginning of a good origin story. People came to a place, it's well defined geographically, they struggle, but they overcome. But it doesn't end there. History then gets added on top. So for example, one day some invaders arrive on a boat. The islanders, they're not strong enough to repel the invaders. So the invaders occupy the island. But the invaders soon realize they don't know how to live on the island without the help of the islanders. And the islanders reluctantly help the invaders, but as they do, they assimilate the invaders into the existing culture, so that over time, the invaders become just like the rest of the island people. And then they all intermarry and have kids and go on. So this happens for a period of time. They all live together as a single culturally cohesive group. And again, they live a very good life. But then a new invader arrives. This time, the local people are more powerful than the invader, so they repel the invader. And then everything is good again. And this pattern goes on many times. Invasion, assimilation, invasion, repelling. And the stories of how the islanders were strong and powerful, but also weak and taken advantage of, get added to their history. And they incorporate all of it. There's no sugarcoating. It's a story of ups and downs. It's a story of challenge, perseverance, overcoming great difficulties, love and loss, and ultimately success. And the thing is that everyone relates to the most important part, the origin story, the beginning, because it involves an obvious place, the island, and an obvious people themselves. So the origin story and the history get packaged together and kind of passed down from generation to generation. The story binds the people together. So that's the foundation of a long-lasting society. Some good examples today would be places like Japan and Iceland. Both islands, really good origin stories and a history. But you don't need to be an island. I mean, there's others that have all the right elements. A place with well-articulated geographic boundaries and a rival story, long history, their own language. These would be places like Portugal and Denmark. Denmark is 1,000 years old. It'll probably go another 1,000. There are some places that lack some or all of the ingredients needed for a powerful origin story. Germany, Nigeria, Canada, not good. And America, even worse. America has always been an idea. America is an idea of freedom and the American dream. Come to America, be free, start your own little business, be your own boss. Work hard, raise a family, buy a house in the suburbs, take a vacation, watch your children and grandchildren go through the same wonderful life. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's a pretty good idea, but ideas are unstable. And the absolute worst of the worst are ideas that have a leader who tries to enforce a starting date. Everything before the date is to be eliminated and discarded. Everything after the date is to be idolized as part of the grand idea. But let's call this starting date year zero. Now, it doesn't really matter what the idea is called. It could be communism or capitalism or freedom or democracy or something like that. But whatever it is, the idea has no attachment to any specific place. But year zero gives the idea a time reference, like an origin story. It's a beginning. But historically, the most dangerous people are those who are very attached to their idea and its imaginary starting point, year zero. Year zero, of course, always begins with themselves. But every murderous and mentally unstable society has this in their origin story, a year zero of some kind, this desire to erase the past, which then leads to the killing of anyone who represents the past and the destruction of symbols and artifacts from the past. So Mao Zedong, leader of China's Cultural Revolution, was attached to an idea called communism. And for him, as leader, this required the creation of a completely new society. Evidence of the past had to be removed, and he named the past the four olds: old ideas, culture, customs, habits. They all had to be eliminated. This meant destroying buildings, artifacts, temples, people, and everything that represented the past. So, of course, millions died. Business people were typically the first targets, and birds were the last. Pol Pot, leader of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, he had an actual stated year zero, April 17th, 1975. From that date onward, all elements of the past society in Cambodia, were to be discarded. So again, anyone who represented the past in any way was to be killed. A couple million dead under him. Teachers, intellectuals, anyone who wore glasses, anyone who spoke French, all dead. One of the esteemed founding fathers of America, Thomas Paine, was a year zero kind of guy. In his famous 1776 work called Common Sense, he advocated that, in quotes, "we have it in our power to begin the world over again." That is year zero thinking. Now, America as a whole is not a year zero nation, but it certainly has the thick blood of it coursing through its veins. Outbursts of year zero thinking are quite obvious, actually. From the idea of America to flourish, the past had to be removed to make way for it, to make way for the new idea. So, British loyalists, for example, had to go, expelled to Canada. Thank you very much. Millions of Native Americans had to go through expulsion or death. They represented the past. The land needed to be cleared so the new idea, called America, could be seeded into the soil. Today, the most sinister is Klaus Schwab, Yuval Harari, and the whole WEF gang, who are year zero people. In their eyes, it's humans themselves that must be erased. Humans will become transhuman, they say. Their year zero is called the Great Reset. Luckily for the rest of us, year zero people, dangerous as they are, stand on pretty shaky ground. So when people no longer believe in the idea falls apart. But the problem is that ideas can look really appealing at the beginning, but they only last as long as everyone agrees to them. Now, some ideas last a long time. Some are very short. The Khmer Rouge and their idea was enforced only for 4 years. China's Cultural Revolution, 10 years. America as an idea, 250 years. Now, America as an idea is obviously better than the ideas of the Khmer Rouge and the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So, America as an idea was actually pretty decent. In some ways it was It was nasty and a little bit flawed, but otherwise, it was actually quite successful. The problem is that the idea is no longer within reach of most Americans, especially the young. So the young are abandoning the idea. One of the admirable things about America is that it's pretty good at reinventing itself. And maybe it will reinvent itself and offer a new version of the idea. America 2.0. I don't know. It seems there are too many indicators suggesting America, the idea, is not going to last. The one thing that is more certain is that America will last longer than Canada, only because people have the ability to hold on to an idea longer than they're willing to hold on to a broken contract. And Canada was always a contract. Not a dream, not an idea, a contract. The contract was simple. Big Daddy would take care of the money, the people would live together as a family, and Big Daddy would make sure everyone would have a life of contentment. Not an exciting life, but a life where most people are content. Peace, order, and good government. That was the Canadian contract. We also adopted some others into the family as well. We adopted this girl called Quebec, and she's actually really cute, but she's French, so she can be really infuriating to be around sometimes. But whatever, hey, c'est compliqué, but it's okay. And we adopted the indigenous people as well. Those of us who've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with them have learned many things, many wonderful things actually. But overall, the family relationship hasn't always been as easy, maybe as we were originally hoping it would be, but we were always willing to work on it. And that was the contract. And most people were fine with that. But Big Daddy has been failing with the good government clause in the family contract. He's gotten involved with some bad people and questionable businesses. He's been hanging out with some rather shady characters. He's been letting a lot of those shady characters into the house and letting them do whatever they want. And it's been causing a lot of uneasiness within the family. These are family members who used to be a really close-knit group that felt safe and content. Now they don't even like being at home very much. Most are struggling, and they're definitely not content. The young, for example, have never experienced the whole social cohesion thing that the older generation often talks about. They have no idea what that was like. Those good times from the past when Big Daddy was more responsible are not something that they can relate to. So for them, they were born when Big Daddy was already failing in his responsibilities. And while the great-grandparents, who signed the contract are long gone now, Big Daddy is still around, trying to run their family affairs like it's 1867. The thing is, all contracts have limits, even family contracts. And Canada doesn't have a good origin story. Canada doesn't even have a grand idea to pine over. There's no dream to be emotionally attached to. It had family, but sometimes not even that is enough. And for the kid called Alberta, well, he'll be the first to openly rip up the contract. He was always the feisty one in the family. After that, the rest of the family will go on their own separate way as well. So then, would Alberta join America? Well, he could do that, but the thing is, the American dream is fading almost as fast as the Canadian contract. We're heading into a time where there's a strong shift towards contraction in the West, not expansion. And based on the trends, whether you look at it from an economic cycles perspective, or organizational complexity, or the rise of feminism, or origin stories, they all point to the same conclusion. The continent is going to break apart into many countries. It is not going to expand into one giant empire called America the Great. There are certainly some who want America the Great, and some who believe in that. And, maybe Mr. Trump and his successor can pull it off. Mr. Trump had a very nice State of the Union address the other day. And he and I we actually share the same birthday, so I'm slightly partial to him. Um, and they say never bet against America. Nothing personal, but America is broke. The dream is fading, and America's 250 years old this year, which happens to be the average lifespan of an empire. So things are not looking good. Martin Armstrong certainly sees this and thinks this is essentially the way we're going. So these new countries will be more manageable politically, economically, socially, culturally, and of course geographically. This is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. These regions will create their own origin stories. People who live in them, connected to the actual places, they'll have a shared history and a reason for being that is based on more than just an abstract idea or a family contract. They'll have their own economies that they control. That's the big thing, that they control. There'll be no more economic levers being pulled by Washington, D.C., or Ottawa, or Beijing, or Davos, Switzerland. In other words, Canada and America will both dissolve. Canada first, America second. In that moment in between, Alberta joining America would be maybe a bit like trying to catch a falling knife. But hey, Alberta can do what it wants. It's up to them. It's totally up to them. And I think there's a mixed appetite for that anyway inside Alberta. And that's probably a good thing. But an independent Alberta would probably be better off just waiting to see how the dust settles out around it. Although, as I say this, I can't help but remember that Albertans have a lot of great qualities. They are tough. They are hardworking. They are tenacious. They pull together in a crisis like no other. They are go-getters. But the one thing they definitely do not have in abundance is patience. They would rather be doing something while doing nothing. So they may very well end up joining America, which is like diving into the deep end of the pool at the same time the water is draining out. But hey, why not? The one thing that's true in Alberta above everything else is that whatever you're doing, you're already behind. So at the end of the day, why not? Go join America, give her a try, get her done.